Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1014B, and today's date is July 5th, 2016, and the title of the episode is NATO is now supplying AWACS support in the Middle East. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, the Department of Homeland Security, they're going to use social media to vet people coming into the United States. This is part of their plan here. And this is a change to the Electronic System for Travel Authorization, ESTA, E-S-T-A, and to Form I-94W. And what they say on these forms is you need to enter information associated with your online presence. You need to enter the provider, the platform, enter the social media identifier. So what they want to do is they want to take a look at your social media if you're entering the United States. Now, they're saying that collecting the social media data will enhance the existing investigative process and provide DHS greater clarity and visibility to possible nefarious activity. So really, terrorists and those people, they're going to be posting all of this in social media. It seems a little ridiculous to me. Because if we look at their end of the story of all these terrorists who are running around shooting up people, has it really helped at all with the FBI, NSA, CIA looking at all of these people? And they're looking at their social media? Has it helped at all if we believe the official story? No. Most of the time, these people, I would say 99.999% of the time, they're patsies. They're set up by the FBI, CIA, NSA. So, of course, you're not going to find anything. Just like in the San Bernardino false flag, they had to get into the phone. Well, the phone they were trying to get into was a business phone. What did they find? Have you heard anything? Absolutely nothing. Of course they haven't. There was nothing really on social media. When we look at the Orlando shooting, did it help stop this? Did it help them since they're spying on everyone's social media? Looking at Twitter, looking at Facebook, looking at MySpace, looking at all of these different platforms? No. Because if you're a real criminal, a real terrorist, you're not using this. All of this is being done, it's being done to spy on the people. That's it. That's all it's being done for. They want to know what everyone is doing. We proved in our last report that all the cases where they say encryption is the problem, there were like hardly any cases that these people were using encryption. They don't want encryption because it makes it easier for them to look at your information. That's it. Now, in regards to the Orlando false flag at the Pulse nightclub, we know this was a false flag event. And this is another indicator that's showing us that this was totally a false flag event. The FBI has now ordered a complete blackout on information about the suspected false flag event. According to the Orlando Sentinel, the FBI sent a letter to law enforcement requesting that agencies deny inquiries and direct departments to immediately notify the FBI of any request your agency received so the FBI can seek to prevent disclosure through appropriate channels as necessary, which means they need to block all information so nothing gets out. When you need to hide information on a case, when you black out information on a case, this shows you that something is up. When you supply a transcript and you block out the information about the Orlando shooter calling in to 911 and then say, oh, you really want to see the full thing? Well, here it is. Well, where's the voice recording? Why don't we get that analyzed? Why don't we hear that? All of this points to one thing and one thing only. Because if this was the truth and it wasn't a false flag, they'd have no problem releasing any of this information. They do on every other case. They release the 911 calls. They let people hear them. They don't produce a transcript which is redacted. They don't hide or control the information. And when people are asking through the Freedom of Information Act, that is still blocked. This shows you and tells you right off the bat that they are hiding this entire event and they're trying to keep it concealed of what really happened. Now we see a newly leaked document, which was published by The Intercept, that exposes how easy it is for the FBI to spy on journalists using the NSL letters, the national security letters. The classified rules, which had previously been released only in heavily redacted form, show that the FBI imposes few constraints on itself when it bypasses the requirement to go to court and obtain subpoenas on search warrants before accessing journalist information. This is coming from The Intercept's Cora Curry, and we see Trevor Tim of the Freedom of the Press Foundation, an advocacy group which had petitioned for the release of these documents, calls Thursday's revelations quite disturbing, since the Justice Department spent 2 years trying to convince the public that it updated its media guidelines to create a very high and restrictive bar for when and how they could spy on journalists using regular subpoenas and court orders. These leaked rules prove that the FBI can completely circumvent the media guidelines and just use an NSL in total secrecy. Tim says they don't have to even go through the motions for following any of the several rules laid out in the Department of Justice, like get the Attorney General to sign off, exhaust all other means of investigation, alerting and negotiating with effective media organizations, making sure what is being sought is essential to the investigation. So we see the rules stipulate that if the NSL is trying to identify a leaker by targeting the records of the potential source and not the journalist, the Justice Department doesn't need to be involved. So here we are once again, where the powers that be, the FBI, Department of Justice, they're making these rules up, but guess what? They don't follow the rule of law. They feel they're above this. They don't need to follow it. They can spy on anyone they want. They can search you at any time. And this is growing. This movement is growing, where they're continually saying, you must follow the rules, but we don't have to. Well, I'm sorry. The contract of we the people says that you must abide by these rules. You have to abide by our rights. You just can't circumvent them because you decide that they're in the way. They're there for a reason. But again, the government agencies, they don't care about the people. They don't care about the rights. They don't care about following the rule of law. And through their actions, we are definitely seeing this. Now, out in France back in 2015, we understand there were other false flags. And now the French are looking to fuse their intelligence services into one gigantic single agency that will handle everything. They're using the excuse that there's too many agencies. They couldn't coordinate. They couldn't do anything to stop this terror attack. And we know for a fact that this was a false flag. We know it happened in France. We know it happened in Australia. We know it happened in Canada. And they're using the excuse to create one big intelligence agency. And we see a lot of countries creating draconian laws, taking away the rights of the people as they continually push these false flags on us. They're using terror. They're using whatever they possibly can to scare, to create laws, to push the mass population into doing things they normally wouldn't do. And this is going to accelerate as we move into the latter part of this year. Now, out in the Pacific, the South China Sea specifically, we know that the U.S. has been moving in military assets. They've been provoking China, and we can see right now they're using all the countries around that area, even Japan, to try to provoke China a little bit at a time. And there was an incident back on June 17th where the Japanese media stated that a Chinese fighter had been close to firing on a Japanese F-15. Now, we're getting different information now where it was actually the opposite. Japan's Air Defense Force, their F-15 fighters, well, they were locking their fire control radars onto two Chinese Sukhoi Su-30 fighters flying over the East China Sea. So they locked on, created this incident, and blamed it on China. And this is how it works every single time. And if you notice, they're continually trying to provoke. Now, NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg, he applauded Canada's decision to contribute land troops to a small force aimed at deterring Russia in Eastern Europe. So Canada now is bringing troops into that area. Sweden right now, which historically has been a neutral country between the U.S. and Russia, is joining the NATO buildup against Russia, allowing NATO to place nuclear weapons in Sweden for an attack against Russia. Now, the alleged reason for joining the operation is that Russian aggression against Ukraine breaches international law and challenges the European security order. And according to Sweden's defense minister, he denied nuclear weapons would be a part of this deal. But we know eventually what they're going to do. They're going to bring in nuclear weapons. Now, Turkey is out there, and they're saying they're going to be granting millions of Syrian refugees citizenship to ramp up a bid to join the EU. They're doing whatever they possibly can to get into the EU. Hungary, on the other hand, is going to have a referendum on October 2nd on whether to accept any future European Union quota system for resettling migrants. And we see right now the question that's going to be held on this referendum is, do you want the European Union to be entitled to prescribe the mandatory settlement of non-Hungarian citizens in Hungary without the consent of Parliament? The Hungarian government asked Hungarian citizens to say no to mandatory resettlement and to say no to the immigration policies of Brussels. We'll decide ourselves. You have to remember, the EU, their main goal is to take away sovereignty from every single country, to control the creation of currency, to control the governments, to control what laws are made and how the laws will be processed. Now, Russia is saying they're ready to boost cooperation for anti-terrorism efforts with Saudi Arabia. Since the suicide bombing near a U.S. consulate in Saudi Arabia, Russia has stepped in and said, listen, you need some help, we'll work with you. We'll get to the bottom of this and we'll get those terrorists. Now, are they going to go ahead and do this? We'll have to wait and see. Now, Turkey's apology to Russia, well, that needs to be tested. I know Turkey came out, Erdogan came out, wrote a letter, spoke to Putin. It's a lot of words going back and forth. But we need to see the actions of Turkey. And this is where I think it's going to break down. Because we know that Turkey has been supplying the Islamic State, the fighters, with weapons, equipment. We know there's a corridor where all this is being passed back and forth. And you have to wonder one thing about all of this. You have the U.S. coalition, satellites, NATO there, satellites, looking at every aspect of what's going on there, knowing everything. They've never seen any of this? Think about it for a second. Well, the reason they haven't seen any of this is because they're part of it. So we're going to have to watch Turkey to see if they close the borders, They stopped supplying the Islamic State and the other terrorist groups with all of these types of weapons. And we'll have to watch and see, because actions are stronger than words. We see Amnesty came out with a new report about how the jihadists, al-Nusra, the Islamic State, al-Qaeda, they've been committing torture and killings in civilian areas under their control. Here we are once again, showing that the proxy armies for the United States government central bankers, they're the ones who are torturing and killing the civilians. They use mustard gas, they use chlorine gas, they use sarin gas on the civilians. Why? Because the U.S. could care less, and I'm not talking about the people of the U.S., I'm talking about the government who was pushing this war. They could care less about the people. They just want that government removed. They want the puppet government in. Actually, all those people who are going to give them a problem later, they're going to be terrorists. And they're going to be droned later on. Now, speaking about drones, there was a leaked U.S. document that revealed drones, they seek to create non-stop terror. Well, we just have to remember this. And I know many of you have heard this before. I've said it before. When the U.S. is going into a country, they use al-Qaeda, they use al-Nusra, they use the Islamic State, they use terrorist forces as their proxy army. Once they get into the country and they replace the government, all those civilians who are against the puppet government, they call them al-Qaeda. This is how they can use the Authorization Act to go and drone al-Qaeda in all of these countries. Because this leaked document reveals by The Intercept that the U.S. government hits civilians 90% of the time during these drone strikes. 90% of the casualties are civilians, not terrorists, not the people they've been looking for. Because really what's happening here is these individuals, they're all civilians. They want the puppet government out. So upon viewing the leaked Operation Haymaker documents, it becomes clear that America's drone operation in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, in Lebanon, in Pakistan, you name it, it has no tactical value in eliminating specific terrorist groups. And the actual benefits, all you see right now is pushing terror, fear, socio-political division in targeted areas. But it's not to get terrorists. So we can see right now from these leaked documents, it backs up everything that we've been talking about. Now, we know that Erdogan is trying to make peace with Russia. And then it comes out that the Turkish Stream pipeline might be back on. Now, of course, we know Russia wants this to go through, and this means a lot of money coming to Turkey. Because as we know, the pipeline was going to have the capacity of supplying 63 billion cubic meters of natural gas a year, of which 16 billion cubic meters will be used by Turkey. The remainder will be collected in a hub at the border between Turkey and Greece and distributed to Europe. Turkey was going to make a lot of money off of this. Now we see Russia, they have their aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean, along with the U.S. buildup of 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean. The Russian aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, will participate in strikes against militants in Syria from October to January of 2017. And the U.S. brought 2 aircraft carriers into the Mediterranean to show Russia, look, we have the strength here. The UN, they came out with a new warning of renewed cycle of sectarian strife in Iraq. And we can see right now that the UK, the US, because of what happened in Baghdad, they're going to use this to bring in more troops into the area. Now, during the Battle of Fallujah, the US was out there saying, oh no, Fallujah, it's not fully captured, but we did find out that yes, the Iraqi forces have completely captured and retaken Fallujah. And the Iraqi forces wanted the US to hit this 500 vehicle convoy as it was leaving Fallujah, and the US didn't want to go ahead and hit this convoy. Then we come to find out that this convoy was made up of Islamic State fighters, and there were about 500 vehicles, and there were CIA advisors mixed in with the convoy. This is why they didn't want to hit the convoy. And we can see the US is still using the Islamic State. CIA is on the ground all over the place. And we can see that this is starting to ramp up, where they're trying to protect their assets. They're bringing more troops in, more CIA operatives into the area. We see NATO now is going to boost its efforts to train local forces in the Middle East and in Northern Africa to fight what they're calling terrorism. But what they're really saying is they're going to be bringing more forces into the area. We see NATO says it will approve on Friday the use of sophisticated AWACS surveillance aircraft for flights in Turkish and international space near the conflict zones in the Middle East. NATO Chief Jens Stoltenberg said Monday that the aircraft would provide information to the U.S.-led coalitions targeting the Islamic State positions in Iraq and Syria. But we know this is not what they're really targeting. They know where these forces are. It's the proxy army for the United States government central bankers. What they're looking for is Assad's forces, holes where they can move into. We see Assad issued a decree to form a new cabinet, and he pretty much retained his key ministers in this new cabinet lineup. Now we're getting reports from Spanish intelligence. They're warning of an imminent terror attack in Spain. And they're saying it's coming from a special group. And the special group is Al-Andalus. And it's an offshoot of the Islamic State. They were established by the Islamic State, and they plan to stage a series of terrorist attacks in Spain. Now, when is this going to be? We don't know. But actually, every time they come out and say they have information, you notice none of these terrorist acts actually happen. It seems like there's a terrorist attack when they don't report it, when they have no idea, because these are the real inside jobs. All of this is fluff to make everyone think that they have information. What they do is they put out all this information that they're following this new plan from the Islamic State, and then all of a sudden we have an event in a completely different area. Unexpected, out of nowhere. How could this be? Well, we know this is all an inside job. They weren't provided with any of this information because they had to let the false flag occur. And we're going to see more of these false flags as we go throughout this year. Because as we can see, the economy is deteriorating. We see that they're trying to push war, and they don't have that much time left. As things rapidly deteriorate, they don't want some type of black swan side swiping them to mess up their plans, because they want to bring down the economies the way they want to bring them down, so they can blame it on another group, another country, so they don't have to be blamed for what is about to happen. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.